Padawans of Python, it's Prof G, and today we're gonna make Master Yoda talk when you touch his hands. You'll be able to customize this any way you like. I'll set the build so touching his right hand will trigger a phrase related to visiting my office on campus.
Seeking Professor G, you are. Come to the right place you have.
While touching his left hand will trigger a Magic 8-Ball style response to a question you might ask him.
Hey Yoda, will people like this lesson?
Certain of this, I am.
So let's use the Force and CircuitPython to make something awesome. Now, if you're new here, you might want to consult the playlist, but if you've been following along, you can actually attempt this as a challenge because we've already worked through all of the learning you need to accomplish this build. We're going to combine elements of several prior lessons, how to use a microSD card reader with a Pico, how to play MP3 files without clicks or pops, and how to work with the NPR 121 touch sensor. And here are the components that you're going to need for the build. A Raspberry Pi Pico style microcontroller. This would work on any of the newer iterations like the Pico 2. Now we're going to be working with a breadboard, so you'll want a Pico with a pin soldered on. Now don't forget you're going to need a micro USB data cable to connect your Pico to your computer. Make sure it's a data cable and not a charge only cable. I love the one I'm showing here because the micro USB portion is reversible. That's not normally the case. If you don't have a breadboard, one that I recommend is from Monk Makes because it has the Pico pin numbers printed right on the board. The Pico doesn't have the pin numbers on it, so this is a huge help for your maker work. You'll also want a micro SD card reader, and you'll want to solder the header pins on that so you can use it with a breadboard. You'll also want a micro SD card for file storage. Anything 32 gigabytes or smaller should be fine. Most computers have a micro SD slot on the side, but if yours doesn't, you'll need a plug-in micro SD card reader. We're also going to use the 12-pad Gator NPR 121 board. That's a Stemma QT compatible board. And to use that with a Pi, you'll want the 4-pin Stemma QT cable that's breadboard friendly. You can use any speaker with a standard audio plug. I also like to use a breadboard-friendly audio jack for a sturdier build. This is more reliable than connecting your speaker with alligator clips. If you get a breadboard-friendly audio jack, make sure that you get one that matches the pin on your speaker. So the little hamburger speakers that I use all have stereo plugs. Now there is an option to buy mono jacks, but you'll definitely want a stereo jack if you have a stereo plug on your speaker. This is how you tell. The stereo plug on your speaker has 3 areas for the plug separated by 2 bands. The tip and the middle band are for the 2 stereo channels, and the bottom is the ground. The mono only has 2 areas separated by 1 band, the tip and the ground. You'll also need a bunch of pin jumper wires and some alligator clips to go from the touch pads to your touch points. You might even want some additional copper wire or other material like conductive thread if you want to get creative with your touch points. And I'll show you how I use copper wire. Now let me show you the hardware build for this lesson. The pins for the micro SD card reader are the same we've used in earlier lessons. Same for the Stemma QT cable that connects to our NPR 121. The stereo audio has 2 audio outs. Now those are the outer legs of the jack. You can simply wire those 2 together. So you see how I've got a jumper going from one outer leg to the other one. You're only going to use 1 speaker, and you wouldn't benefit from stereo anyway because we mixed all the audio files from stereo down to mono. But you want to wire one of those audio outs out to pin GP15, and the ground pin in the middle can go to any ground. Also make sure that the power you're using for the SD card reader and your Stemma QT cable go into the 3.3 volt power. If you're using a smaller breadboard, you might need to wire 3.3 volt power into the power rail and then use that to connect the other 2 power lines. Once things are wired up, the rest of the build is super easy. I've wrapped some copper wire around each of Yoda's hands, then I've threaded alligator clips up his robe, and I've clipped one each to each of the 2 copper wires. Make sure the wires don't touch or cross. Then I've clipped the other ends of the alligator clips to pads. I'm using pad 0 for the right hand and pad 5 for his left hand. There are a lot of other materials you can use to detect touch. You can experiment with conductive thread, conductive cord, ink, or paint, but I had some copper wire around, and I don't think this distracts too much from Yoda's look. So now let's get the files we're going to need in this build from the GitHub repo at this URL, github.com/Gallagher. Remember, my name has a U in it, so it's like Gallagher, /make-it-talk, all lowercase. This link is also in the description of this video if you don't want to type the URL in. And when you arrive at this page, feel free to read the README if you'd like. It's also got links to where you can buy all of the products. I don't get any commission on this stuff, but these are the ones that I've used in my build. And you can click on the green code button and select download zip. I'm going to save mine to the desktop. You can minimize your browser. Make sure you've plugged your micro SD card reader into your computer and you plug your micro SD card in. And if you look in the folder you just downloaded, there should also be a folder named Yoda, and you can see there are a ton of phrases in here. These are all properly formatted MP3 files. In an earlier lesson, I showed you how you can set your own MP3 files up with the correct formatting using free Audacity software. Please excuse me for having some phrases related to my university. Again, this is something that's on my desk. So BC is for Boston College. Our mascot is the Eagle. schools. It's a Jesuit university, so the tenet to be a person for others is one of the things that Yoda says. But there are dozens of phrases in here, so feel free to leave out the ones that you don't want. You can also create your own. I did this a while ago using a service from the Acapella group, and there was a character called Will Little Monster that I thought sounded just like Yoda. It looks like the company might not offer that service anymore, but feel free to check out different options, and if you find something neat, why don't you link to it in the comments. My SD card shows up as no name on my desktop, but it's already formatted. I'll copy my Yoda folder onto that card reader. After you're done, properly eject the card, and then pop it back into your build. Now let's make sure we have everything we need in our CircuitPy volume. So first you should have an empty folder on your board that's named SD in lowercase. That's S as in Sam and D as in Delta. If it's not there, and I'll delete mine now so you can see what you need to do, is you can just right click and then select new folder, but make sure that you name it SD, again, all in lowercase. And it shouldn't have anything inside it, but it's just needed as a placeholder to help your code find the external SD card reader. I know it's weird, but that's just how it works. Then we want to make sure that we have the mount_sd.py library in our lib folder. There's a copy of this in the folder you just downloaded from GitHub. You might have written your own copy in a previous lesson, but you can also copy this right into your lib folder right now. Just make sure that it gets inside your lib folder. It's really easy to miss. I do that lots of times, and double check that it's inside there. Then you can drag over code.py. We always make sure that we make backups of each lesson, but if the code that you've got in there is important to you, back it up first. And I'm also going to rename the code.py in the GitHub folder to make-it-talk.py, and I'm going to copy it and the mdsd.py files into my CircuitPython School folder just so that we have backups ready to refer to in future projects. And we're done with the Make It Talk main folder, so you can throw that away if you'd like. And now let's launch PyCharm. So this code should be very familiar to you if you've completed the previous lessons, but I'll quickly walk you through it right now. These are the libraries we're importing. Some things to note. We're using Audio Mixer so that we don't get the clicking sounds every time we play an audio file, and I'm going to debounce the touchpads. I found that if you didn't do this, the touchpads were too sensitive and sometimes went off or fired on their own, so Yoda started speaking on his own. There are a few ways to prevent this, but I tried debouncing and it seemed to work, so that's why I'm using debouncing with my touchpads. The Mount SD library shows up in red. That's just because this is a library that we created. You can ignore that. Now we import audio out in this block of code. We really only need PWM audio out for the Pico, but this code works on other boards that have a DAC too. And in the build diagram I showed you, I have my audio out wire coming from the stereo audio jack going into the GP15, or I should say it's going out of GP15 into the audio jack. It's because the speaker is a digital output. Stuff comes out from the board into the speaker. And if you use a different pin, just change it here. Now I've set my path to /SD for the SD card, and that's going to go into the card, not the SD folder on your CircuitPy volume. And unfortunately, the card doesn't show up on the desktop when it's plugged into your board. So if you want to update any of the files on your SD card, you have to unplug it from your board and then plug it back into your computer. Now the /Yoda is where the code will find the Yoda folder on my SD card. If you name the folder on your SD card something other than Yoda, be sure that you change it here. Then we set up the audio mixer and the MP3 decoder. I used brilliant.mp3 as the file to set up the MP3 decoder. If you don't have that file on your SD card, make sure you use a file that you have on your SD card, and that file should be on your SD card in a folder that you're pointing to with the path variable. Then I have two lists. First one has all the sayings that I want Yoda to say if someone touches his right hand. These sayings play one after another, one sound each time a hand is touched, and when we get to the last element in the list, we'll loop back to the first one, element 0. We'll handle the touching and the looping in the while true loop. Now this second list is called answers, and this has a list of all the sound files that I think sound like they're answering questions Magic 8-Ball style, and those will be chosen at random if somebody touches Yoda's left hand. Then I have the play MP3 voice function. Again, this works with Audio Mixer to eliminate any clicks that might occur from audio play using a Pico. Then we set up a stemma QT connection. I'm only using 2 touchpads. You can absolutely use all 12 to respond to each touch in a different way. You can even do things like light up lights or run motors if you touch a touchpad, but I only wanted to respond to a touch of the left and right hand. His right hand is touchpad 0, his left hand is going to be touchpad 5, and I put these on opposite sides of the board to eliminate any possible interference if the wire is touched by accident. Now, saying number keeps track of the current saying in the sayings list. We're going to start with element 0, the first phrase in the list. And then we're at our continuous loop, the while true. We first update 2 of our debounced touchpads to get the latest state. Then if button 0 is pressed, that's Yoda's right arm. I want to play sayings one at a time, so I'm going to print out the saying first just for debugging. This might be helpful if you use different code in the future and you've got a different sounds list or different sounds in a different sound folder. Then I just play the element in the sayings list at saying number, and then this line and the commented line out below it do the same thing. I keep them both in here just so that you have one-liners that are examples of incrementing the saying number by 1. And if we reach the last element in the sayings list, then we're going to return saying number back to 0. Now, I covered both of these techniques in earlier lessons. The first one uses the modulo or remainder operator, that percentage sign, and the second one uses the ternary operator, the way to get an if-else in a single line. Now, if button 5 is pressed, this is Yoda's left hand, and I want him to say a random element of the answers list. So random.choice, passing in the answers list, gives us a random element of that list. It's a single string, and then we print it out below, and we play it, and that's it. That's our code. If anything is unfamiliar, feel free to watch the earlier lessons, but let's try them out. All right, let's open the terminal. Let's make sure we're in TO. We'll save our work. Looks like the code is running. All right, here we got things running. Let's see what happens if somebody comes into my office and they touch his right hand. Should get a phrase.
Seeking Professor GUR. Come to the right place you have.
Oh, how interesting. What if they notice I usually have a candy dispenser Skittles on my desk? What would they hear?
Hungry are you? Skittles you may have.
Oh, well, thank you, Master Yoda. What if I ask a question here? Do you think people will enjoy this for CircuitPython Day, the lesson that I just created?
Not of anything to say about it I have.
Oh, come on. Master Yoda, do you think I'm going to have a good semester?
Already you know that which you need.
Well, I hope that's the case. So I hope you've enjoyed this build video, you defenders of the Republic, you. Remember, there's lots of other goodness online, and if you post a photo or video of your build on Threads, Mastodon, or the Gram with my handle on the hashtag BuiltWithProfG, you just might be selected for the weekly Make Something Awesome sticker. I'll send it free anywhere in the world. Until then, continue to hack, and
May the Force be with you.